And Mayor, I will turn this over to you.
Talk about throwing water on a fire.
All right, with that, I'm calling the work session for the Springfield City Council to order with roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon.
Here.
Councilors Pitts.
Here.
Moe.
Here.
Rodley.
Here.
Stair.
Here.
Woodrow.
Here.
And Pictionary.
Present.
All right, it looks like we have one item tonight, which is the Main Street Draft Solution Toolbox and Recommendations with Brian Barnett and Molly Markarian. Or just, it looks like just Molly. We'll turn it over to you, Molly.
Okay, Brian should be here.
Yeah, he was there.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Says I can't share while another participant is. So there we go. Okay. So can you see my screen now? Okay. Good evening. I'm Molly Markarian, Senior Planner with the city. And as you all know, the Main Street Safety Project is a collaborative effort between the city and ODOT. In the audience tonight is also Bill Johnston, ODOT's project manager, and also the consultant project manager, John Bosket. And then, as we all noted, Brian Barnett, city's traffic engineer, is here with us as well. Tonight, I'm going to start with a brief project refresher, share where we are with the project, and then review the draft solution toolbox and recommendations that we've developed. I'll also highlight the key feedback themes that we have heard from the community. And then, as hopefully you saw in attachment 1, we shared a number of discussion questions. And so we're looking for your feedback and input on those questions. And the key question is, do the toolbox and recommendations meet your expectations and direction to date? Oops. This should look familiar to all of you. We like to start our presentations with the purpose statement to help remind us why we're all here. The purpose of the Main Street Safety Project is to select infrastructure solutions that will make Main Street safer for people walking, biking, driving, and taking transit. Over the past 2+ years, our project team has been refining the recommended solutions based on community input, technical analysis, and city council feedback. At this stage in the planning phase, we're seeking feedback on draft recommendations to inform preparation of a draft facility plan that will guide future design and construction of safety improvements on the corridor. The next step in our process is drafting the facility plan. So your feedback on the recommendations presented tonight will inform our drafting of that facility plan. What is a facility plan anyway? Well, it pulls together the analysis, outreach, and design concepts that we've developed during this planning phase. It is an expression of the community's values. It becomes a design framework for the project. It results in a transportation system plan amendment, and it leads to design and construction. We've included this slide as a reminder of the community values and community priorities that were shared with us by the community early on in the project. Those informed our drafting of the goals and objectives for this project, our draft solution evaluation criteria, and then of course our draft recommendations. And I'd just like to note that the feedback that we received from the community earlier this winter on the draft toolbox and recommendations is tracking with the input we received early on in terms of values and goals and objectives. The Main Street Safety Project is recommending changes to Main Street to help improve safety and address the specific type of crashes that occur on Main Street. We see a high percentage of rear end and turning movement crashes on the corridor, which is common on urban streets with a high number of driveways and intersections, but 80% is particularly high. Our data shows that the primary causes of these crashes are failure to yield right of way and following too closely. We also received questions as to whether there's specific areas on the Main Street corridor that see more crashes than others. As you can see in this map, crashes occur throughout all of Main Street, and thus why we need a corridor-wide solution. Overall, we've heard from business and property owners, the City Council, and the broader community that we need to address safety on Main Street while balancing safety elements with impacts to businesses. Thus, our recommendation is a toolbox of safety infrastructure elements that includes roundabouts, raised medians, sidewalks, and bike lanes. The toolbox approach responds to the community's desire for simplicity, flexibility, and feasibility. If you recall the last time we met with you all, you provided direction to simplify our analysis process and develop a comprehensive solution that could be adaptable to the varied context along the Main Street corridor. Thus, the application of this toolbox is location specific. It is not one size fits all. While the facility plan will serve as a blueprint for a long-term vision for Main Street, given the length of Main Street and the total cost of improvements, future design and construction will happen in phases along Main Street over the next 5 to 20 years as funding becomes available. This represents gradual change to Main Street, as it will take many years for the long-term vision in the plan to be fully constructed. The city will continue to coordinate with ODOT and LTD through design and construction, and will do more focused outreach once a phase is funded. We have short-term and long-term recommendations, an example of how we have responded to the community's desire for gradual implementation of change on Main Street. In the short term, we recommend keeping the cross-section much like it is today to allow for medians to be put in quickly. Raised medians would have the biggest impact on safety while having less interruption to travel on Main Street. In the long term, we recommend improving the safety and comfort for people walking and biking. Most of the corridor would have buffered bike lanes and slightly wider medians, resulting in an additional 4 feet of width on each side of the street. For approximately 4 blocks from just west of 54th to just east of Bob Straub Parkway, where we have larger existing right-of-way and fewer driveway conflicts, we recommend a cycle track next to the sidewalk. I don't expect you to read the fine print on the screen, but we wanted to give you a sense of how we're tailoring those 2 base cross-section recommendations for each segment on Main Street. As I said before, this is not a one-size-fits-all recommendation. Both of the long-term cross-sections would increase the overall footprint of Main Street to improve the bike facility, but include flexibility for modifications specific to each segment along the corridor that could narrow the overall footprint in physically constrained sections of Main Street. Necessary modifications to the recommended cross-sections would be determined during future design phases. Another tool in the toolbox are raised medians or islands within the center lane, because they can do the most to reduce conflicts and move turns to safer locations. They can also make pedestrian crossings safer. Most of Main Street would get raised medians, but we would adjust their locations so that people can still make some left turns and U-turns. We would also phase their implementation in areas with the greatest safety problem and available funding. The toolbox includes flexibility through guiding principles to help meet safety needs while balancing impacts to adjacent business and property owners. 12 guiding principles reflect the input we've received to date to help a future design team determine the appropriate location for breaks in the medians. And these principles include considerations such as keeping openings at all major intersections, allowing left turns and U-turns at minor streets where possible, limiting the amount of extra time it takes someone to access property on Main Street to 30 to 60 seconds on average, allowing left turn access to major traffic generators, and allowing emergency vehicle access. As I mentioned, raised medians have the greatest potential to reduce crashes on Main Street. Use of raised medians, when combined with roundabouts, would reduce crashes by nearly half and limit out of direction travel for business access to about 30 seconds on average. Community members told us this would be an acceptable trade-off when we did outreach. The last major component of the toolbox relates to intersection control. Roundabouts are recommended as the long-term solution for Main Street. We would add roundabouts in phases and will assess engineering trade-offs and design specific to each intersection during the design phase. Another example of location-specific gradual implementation. This winter, we sought feedback in virtual format on the draft solution toolbox and recommendations from our Strategic Advisory Committee, a range of focus groups and civic groups, and the broader community. We also invited adjacent business and property owners to local access forums to hear the latest project updates, give their feedback on the range of recommended safety tools, and to discuss their property access concerns. We also shared how the city has worked in the past with affected business and property owners throughout the design process. We heard varied opinions and preferences from different stakeholder interests on the toolbox and recommendations, but some common themes emerged. On project and process, we heard many anecdotes from community members regarding their experiences with Main Street, being crash victims themselves and observing the safety problem. Overall, folks shared that they are excited to see the problem being addressed and are thankful for the opportunities to be kept informed and provide feedback on the recommendations. We have heard some frustration with the speed of the project and our outreach approach. We also hear overall positive feedback on the toolbox and recommendations. We definitely have heard concerns from many business and property owners on the corridor about possible access and site usage impacts, but often after explaining the toolbox concept, flexibility, phasing, and ongoing opportunities to be engaged through design and construction, their concerns are somewhat mitigated. While we largely heard that roundabouts are a good way to improve safety, some have shared observations of people not safely navigating roundabouts on foot or in car elsewhere in Springfield, but acknowledging that it takes time for the public to learn how to safely navigate roundabouts. We also heard from many that pairing roundabouts with medians is critical, and acknowledging that medians may require driving farther, but are worth it to improve safety and save lives. Some remain concerned with out of direction travel and freight delivery with medians. Other themes we hear repeatedly, but are not directly related to the focus of this project, are observations of the correct use of the new pedestrian crossings on Main Street or lack thereof, a desire to increase traffic enforcement for drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians, a desire to decrease the posted speed limit on Main Street where it has not already been decreased, and a need for improved lighting. In summary, the community has reiterated that there really is a serious safety problem on the corridor. It's our duty to tackle this problem. Our approach is sensible and responsible, and we do listen and we do care, and we will make adjustments during the design phase. As noted in attachment 2 of your packet, there is a long history of planning projects on Main Street. There are many business and property owners who engaged early on in those projects and have not tracked the evolution of Main Street planning decisions since then. So through our outreach, we've been hearing some rumors that we are working to dispel about our current recommendations. You are aware of a lot of these, but I'm going to just quickly run through how we are explaining what this project is not with the community. It's not a lane transit district project. ODOT and the city of Springfield are leading the Main Street Safety Project. We are coordinating with the Main McVeigh Transit Study to plan for transit elements. So LTD is an interested party and is providing input in order to continue providing transit service along Main Street now and into the future. It's not MX. The Main McVeigh Transit Study had considered MX, which could have included dedicated bus-only lanes on Main Street. However, the Main Street governance team formally removed MX from consideration in July 2019. Enhanced corridor transit will integrate with the Main Street facility plan. Under the enhanced corridor mode, buses would primarily run in mixed traffic, but upgrades could be made at bus stops to provide a more welcoming and safer environment for people on foot or on bike. And street improvements could be made to provide safer and more efficient movement by all modes, including more reliable and consistent bus service. It would not prevent all left turns. Main Street would have raised medians, but not continuously throughout the corridor. There would be gaps. Some intersections would have left turn and U-turn pockets. Other intersections would have roundabouts that allow for all turning movements. Also, raised medians would have mountable curbs, so emergency vehicles could drive over them when needed. There would also be no medians directly in front of fire stations on Main Street. It would not need extensive new right-of-way. In the short term, we would focus construction primarily within the existing curb to curb. Along most of Main Street, the proposed future street design would need 4 more feet on each side. The toolbox, as I mentioned earlier, includes cross-section variations for location-specific constraints and property impacts. Narrowing the street in physically constrained locations will happen during the design phase. It's not one size fits all. As I shared earlier, during our most recent round of community engagement, community members confirmed that they like the proposed solution toolbox and range of recommended safety tools, as it provides flexibility to implement infrastructure that will accommodate different segments on the Main Street corridor instead of a one-size-fits-all approach. It would not be built all at once. Design and construction would occur in phases over the next 5 to 20 years as funding becomes available. Phases would be prioritized based on the project's goals and objectives, including addressing the highest safety needs first. Phasing would enable people to see and experience results in early phases, and it also allows community members to adjust to the new street design gradually. Before moving into your questions and discussion, I just wanted to note that we got input on these same discussion questions from the city's planning commission and the Main Street governance team in April. As with other groups, we heard varied opinions, but they agreed that we have the right tools to address the safety problem. What is key is that we emphasize the flexibility and feasibility of this incremental toolbox approach in presenting the draft facility plan to the community. We also heard that we are making progress, even though it has taken several years, and that we have thoroughly engaged and responded to stakeholders. Those two groups provided additional outreach ideas for our next round of engagement. And they discussed that the likely first phase, based on likely available funding, would focus on the highest crash and most severe crash locations. So now I'll just open it up to questions and seek your feedback on the discussion questions that were in attachment 1 of your packet.
Leonard.
Thanks, Mayor. Molly, thanks for this presentation. The second phase that begins at 32nd on Main Street seems significantly more expensive than the first phase, which goes from 21st to 32nd. Is that just a matter of area and asphalt poured, or are there other factors involved?
Yes.
Well, Brian could answer some of that, but I just wanted to clarify that the first phase isn't necessarily the westernmost segment along the corridor.
Okay.
Yes, just to reinforce, Counselor, we don't have any specific phasing plans, but we have some priorities that the plan laid out. But the phasing will really come about based on where the revenue comes from to do the projects, the funding packages that will come about, which are based on the benefit versus the cost. So highest benefit at the lowest cost are where projects will be funded through the All Roads Transportation Safety Program. And yes, to your specific question, the difference in cost on those different segments is strictly based on distance. How many square feet, how many linear feet, or how many miles?
Okay. A couple of citizens approached me about the possibility of planting some trees on the median, just to make it look a little more cheerful and a little less bleak. Have there been any kinds of studies done on what the cost of that might be?
Well, there's a balance here between what ODOT, as the owner of the roadway, will maintain, or whether or not the city would take that responsibility on. We have not made that kind of decision at this point by any means. We certainly are open to it. It's just a matter of, are we going to be able to sustain that over time? So
Okay.
In each project, we would be able to make that determination and find out what ODOT is willing to do and what we need to do if they are unwilling.
Great. Also, I've noticed, just as sort of a general overview of Springfield traffic, our drivers tend to be defensive to a fault. I mean, they'll after you all day long, and four-way stops, just forget about it. But it's bad enough at the roundabouts. And I wanted to just direct this to either one of you, really. Are the roundabouts responsible for more non-lethal accidents than just having straightaways?
Well, traffic signals versus roundabouts. Roundabouts, and let me qualify this, multi-lane roundabouts, which is what we're considering here with on Main Street. Multi-lane roundabouts do have a reduced total crash numbers, and they have a reduced injury and severity of those crashes. So the number of fatalities, the number of injuries definitely goes down. The property damage only type of crashes, they may be steady or go up slightly, but in aggregate, we have fewer crashes and they are less severe.
Right. Good deal. Well, with that, I'll just say that I'm generally happy with the direction that you're headed in, and I'm very much in favor of pressing forward with this. Thanks.
Corey.
Thank you. And thank you for this presentation. I have a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. One, I just want to say I really like the sort of landscape buffers between the bicycles and the road. I understand the perhaps some challenges about landscaping in the middle, but I echo what Leonard said, that it would be nice to be able to like add trees, but I do like the part with the buffers between the sidewalks, the bicycle lanes, and the road. And while I hear this, and I haven't been at the table, but I've been following along, wanting to just make it really clear around the transit. But I am interested in making sure that we sort of hold a space for sort of integrating that bus transit moving forward, even though we don't know what's going to happen, because I think that it would be short-sighted not to. And I see that you've put little pieces in there, but I just want to like say that out loud. And then one of my main question is around the phasing of this and the fact that it could take several years over time. knowing that sort of the best practices and things evolve, and wondering how, whether it's, what's considered ADA compliant, that changes and evolves over time. And there will be new ways of doing this that increase safety. And so I'm wondering, in terms of when you say flexibility, how we take that into consideration so we don't start on a 10-year path, and by the time we get to the end of it, we wish we could start over. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'll be happy to respond kind of the technical side of that, and ask Molly to respond more to the plan document policy side. And you're absolutely right, Counselor, that best practices do change. We learn things and we do modify. And I can attest to the fact I've seen that in my 23 years here at the city. And there's been a lot of positive change, and that will continue, I hope. When it comes to that kind of change, I don't believe there's anything in our toolbox, which is mostly principle based rather than absolutist based, that would preclude us making those kinds of changes. And as we develop each project specifically, we will have an open mind to any changes in best practice. And of course, the council will always be involved with ultimate decisions of that nature. And if you sense we're straying, you can certainly bring correction to us, and we can point out changes that we are aware of and that we would recommend, and you can give us your view on that. So I think there's certainly that opportunity going forward. Nothing precludes it.
Thank you.
Joe?
Hey, thank you. So I've got some questions. So I'm looking at that one side shot of the or the slice of the main street that has the expanded view, and you got 12.5 feet reserved for pedestrians and bicycles. And I'm wondering, and it's been mentioned before, and I'm still a proponent of mixed use pedestrian lanes / bicycle lanes. So bicycle sidewalks / pedestrian sidewalks, as opposed to putting the bicycles down into the street. And I haven't heard anything or any more conversation in regards to that. And I'm just wondering who put the kibosh on that idea.
Well, I'll take responsibility for that along with our consultants, because we did do an analysis of the different choices and safety components that are associated with that. And generally speaking, Counselor, the best practice is not to combine bicycles and pedestrians, particularly in a bidirectional sense for the bicycles. What occurs is that as one is driving a vehicle and turning right into a driveway, for example, you're not necessarily expecting a cyclist to be coming from behind you on that multi-use facility. It works quite well to have multi-use facilities when you have a very limited number of driveway crossings. So for example, we did that on Bob Straub Parkway from Main Street South. And that works because there's very few street intersections and driveway crossings. The other challenge is if you're a driver coming out of a driveway or out on a street, first of all, your stopping point is pushed much further back away from the center line of the roadway. And so it's much more difficult to have good sight lines to see to enter. Or after you've stopped and if you look for cyclists and pedestrians, again, you may not be expecting that cyclist to be approaching on your right if you're pulling out, because that's not where traffic normally is at. And so that is a risk. But let's say you do check the sidewalk mixed use area and then you creep out across it so you can get closer to the curb, then you're blocking that sidewalk and mixed use area. So those are a couple of the reasons that we are not really in favor of that, because the potential for crash and the difficulty of sightline is higher in our view.
I was wondering, you mentioned about the bicyclist approaching, and you're saying automatically assuming it's multi-directional, when bike lanes typically are not multi-directional. Is that correct?
That is true.
So why would you assume that on the pedestrian sidewalk that it would be multi-directional?
Well, simply because that's the observation that the industry has when you have I've forgotten what width we were showing in our 54th to Bob Straub cross section. Molly, if you could check that, that'd be great.
6.5 and 6.
Okay, so 12.5 in total. Thank you, Counselor. So what we find in those types of circumstances.
Oh, I'm sorry, 7 and 6.
Okay, so 13. What we find in those kinds of circumstances is that the cyclist simply will not choose to cross the street just to travel one direction and then cross back if their destination is on the same side of the street their origin was at. And so with a 13-foot wide path, the cyclists are going to say it's just fine. And so they are going to use that path. I mean, candidly, when we've driven or ridden our bikes, maybe at Sun River, those paths are maybe maybe 10 feet wide, and we go both directions on them, and then we have pedestrians there. There potential for some conflict. But then this is a circumstance where we have vehicles crossing at driveways and streets, and so it's the unexpected nature of some of those movements. So that's why I'm explaining that I think it will be bidirectional.
Just by their choice, but not by common sense. So the other questions I have, so the projected out, what is it you're talking about? The comment was made is that the raised mediums will be for safety, and that I get that, but how much safety is there? Has anybody done the numbers? What kind of percentage do you expect to reduce in accidents over the amount of inconvenience for travel? So I'm looking at, like, for example, your percentage based on your numbers of rear end collisions, for example, makes up like 48% of the accidents, and how are medians going to, you know, when those following too close and rear end collisions make up the majority of those accidents. I'm not sure how raised medians are going to reduce that. So you must be targeting other types of accidents. And how much do you expect, what percentage do you expect those to be reduced, or is that just a guess?
The percentages that we had in that slide, well, in fact, this one right here. So raised medians can reduce crashes by 35% on Main Street. That is based on national studies where there's been before and after study of these types of projects. It's included in the Federal Highway Administration's Crash Modification Clearinghouse, which is just a fancy term for where all the studies have been deposited. All the studies have been aggregated for a result. So high, low, added all together. This is what we can expect is 35% of the crashes that occur on a roadway are going to be reduced when you add a median in. And then there's a further reduction when you add roundabouts in on top of that. So I think the academic data is based on real world experience and study of that. And so we can be very comfortable that there's going to be a significant reduction in crashes. I will certainly not guarantee you 35% reduction, but certainly a very good reduction.
Right. That seems 35% is pretty steep. That's a shot in the sky, I think.
I was, in terms of your question about the rear end and turning movement,
Right.
Brian can address this more technically, but with the raised medians, we're going to be seeing turns focused in safer locations. And so there's going to be less frequency of quick into driveway crossing, you know, the center turn lane turns, and that's what the turning movement and the rear end crashes are.
Yes, that's accurate, Molly. A lot of rear end crashes happen because somebody who gets rear-ended is facing some unexpected occurrence in front of them, and so they hit the brakes, and so the person who is following too close runs into them, and so that could be a left turn in front of them, could be somebody pulling out from a driveway, either turning left or right, and so that's what creates some of those rear-end crashes, and that can be reduced because of that unexpected behavior not occurring in front of the victim of being rear-ended.
So from people that are not properly using the center utility lane, is that correct?
Well, in part, it could be not using the center lane correctly, but it could simply be somebody turning right out of a driveway unexpectedly, or left out of a driveway unexpectedly to the driver who ends up getting rear-ended. Obviously, that unexpected movement in front of them causes them to decelerate quickly, and
Right.
the inattentive or following too close person may rear-end them.
Gotcha. All right, well, I'll be following this closely. I think, there's some pretty cool ideas. I'm not an opponent of roundabouts. I'm a proponent of roundabouts. They make a lot of sense to me. So I think it's a good plan so far. I'm gonna, again, continue to question so I can just mostly reach satisfaction in my mind in regards to if we're doing the best thing, and not that I'm like an end all, but I like to get involved in this stuff, as you know. So, but I appreciate it. It's very thorough. And I think that's all my notes here. So, oh yeah, maybe a completely side note is the traffic out on East Main Street has gotten nuts, just so you all know. Unbelievable. It's tripled at least in the last 3 to 4 months. And I'm really hoping that enforcement is really going to step up there, because I go down there and, like just today, it is absolutely insane down there when you see the traffic and the speed the traffic's rolling. When you have overloaded log trucks that are traveling down Main Street at close to 50 miles an hour and through residential is insane. And I think that needs to be revisited very soon, like ASAP. It's just ridiculous. I watched entire blue clouds of smoke today, all the way from 60th place to 58th place of trucks locking up their tires because they're traveling way too fast with way heavy loads. And again, we need to really step up enforcement.
Damien?
Hi, happy Monday. First of all, I just want to say happy Mother's Day to all the mothers and mother figures out there. We love you. All right. 2, I'm curious to what role, or is this even part of this plan, where we have the audible pedestrian crosswalks, as well as any type of ramp or indention that makes people in wheelchair-like apparatuses be able to cross the streets a little easier. I know that I've seen some, but I know that there are a lot of crosswalks where those do not exist. And so when we think about pedestrians, I think the audible crosswalks, as well as, some type of indention or ramp would make our streets a lot more accessible to those who might need a little assistance. Is that a part of the plan? Can it be, or is that somebody else?
Yes, it most certainly is part of the plan. Any sort of significant roadway improvement requires the modification of the curb ramps so that they meet the current standards for what ramps should look like, for slope, for distance, etc. An example of that is the work that you've undoubtedly seen on Mohawk Boulevard. We have an overlay project there, and the precursor to bringing in the asphalt grinder and the asphalt paving is to do all the concrete work at those intersections to create appropriate ramps at all of the intersections and crossing points. So that's the kind of behavior that you will see on Main Street. And if there's an overlay or other significant work on Main Street that is not part of this safety project, that project, an overlay project on Main Street would also be required to do that. And that would be part of the scope of work that ODOT would do in some sort of project that they might undertake that is separate from one of our safety projects. As far as the beacons, we had a safety plan, pedestrian safety plan, about 10 or 11 years ago that was conducted by Oregon DOT. And that identified the highest priority crossing locations. And I believe were about 10 included. And we have just completed the last one, which was the pedestrian hybrid beacon out around roughly 67th. And so that completes the crossings that were included in that particular plan. It certainly would be a next step is to take a fresh look and see if there are other demand locations where crossings are happening on a regular basis, and we could add some more in. We would certainly want to coordinate that with Lane Transit District so that we know where they intend to have their stops in the future, because transit users are one of the major generators of pedestrian crossings.
So, Damien, did you have anything else? So, Brian, could you just extend on that a little bit for anything outside of Main Street that we do from a transportation perspective, under that state settlement agreement, we would have to redo the ramps, correct?
Well, the state settlement agreement addresses ODOT and their past behavior. The Americans with Disabilities Act law really did require that all along. And the city has been pretty good at complying with that. So I would say it's really our practice will continue in the way we have. And ODOT has upped their game. So altogether, it's a good outcome for providing better access.
Perfect. Steve?
Yeah, roundabouts, there are still people afraid of them. And that's because I guess we don't have enough roundabouts, but they're much safer. And 42nd Street and Main, a roundabout there would make a big difference on getting the traffic flow through there. And I've read some reports where the traffic goes through quicker in those situations. So I really support this. I've been overseas, I've seen roundabouts where I don't even have traffic signals, and they just work wonderfully.
Mayor,
Marilee?
from out of the. I had a couple comments, having been on the governance team now for 10 years. The only thing I like the toolbox. I understand everything that's been presented and going forward with it, and the phasing and all that kind of thing. The only thing I want to continue to emphasize is we had a huge meeting probably 3 to 4 years ago with the community out in the library meeting room. And we thought we had come to some conclusions as to what was going to take place on Main Street. And then it all got flipped back up to regenerating the whole process. I know that we have some business owners and other people along the corridor that were upset, confused, frustrated at that point. They carry on with some of their frustration and concerns even now. Even with the amount of input and the amount of information that's been given to them along the way with all the outreach, which has really been done well. My biggest part of making sure that we remain conscious of the fact that there's folks out there that are very cautious about what's happening or what can happen, and that we make sure that every piece of paper that we have out there emphasizes the flexibility and the conversations that will be held with the numerous people along the corridor. One of the ways that we got the pedestrian crossings in the way we did was that I was out there, LTD was out there, ODOT was out there, and our city staff person was out there when we went out for the initial meetings, and we talked to all the people in the immediate surroundings of the crosswalk that was being planned to go in. And because we had that conversation, we got the crosswalks in without a whole lot of problems. I see the same type of process, very workable for the different phases going in and being discussed here in the toolbox and headed into the design phase. And I just think it's really important to make sure that that is front and center of any information that we put out there into the public eye, that they recognize that safety is first and foremost, and especially the highest safety needs being a priority. At the same time, in the midst of conversations and cooperation and flexibility with the business owners and the various tenants along the corridor, because that will make or break what safety occurs with the process. If we have the cooperation and the support and the partnership with the people along the corridor, that will make the project work. So I can't emphasize that enough. I want to make sure they feel like they're part of it. I don't want them to feel like they're on the outside and not being heard. So it needs to be part of every step. And it is, we're making it part of every step, but I just want to make sure that that emphasis is there, that they need to be, feel like they're part of the safety, concerns and the safety improvements. I think that was all I had written down. Yeah, just so that everybody out there, and as a result of the outreach, everybody out there is beginning to understand the different phases that we've been dealing with, and that we're going with the toolbox out of this phase into the next phase. And of course, all of it is dependent on funding as well. So, but yeah, that was it.
All right, thanks, Marilee. I can't echo Marilee's comments enough. I think it's really going to take a lot of sort of conversations. I always think about that crosswalk conversation where you've got the business owners, you've got city staff, you've got ODOT trying to figure out where in the right of way these safety enhancements are going to go. And I think it's just critical that we keep that in mind going forward, is that the resource, like the right of way is a fixed resource for everybody, but it's finite. It's got only so much space. And to make this work for everybody, it's going to take us taking it sort of one driveway at a time. There's like 500 driveways between 21st Street and 72nd, and really having that conversation to get us over the hump. So Molly, could you help with sort of timing? So you guys are going to take this away. Then the next time we're going to see it it's going to be the actual facility plan.
Yes, after I just stop sharing my screen. But the next milestone is that this summer we will be developing the draft facility plan, and then we will go bring it to our technical advisory committee, our strategic advisory committee, kind of through that process again with the Planning Commission and the Main Street Governance team and the broader public outreach, and then we'll bring it back to you all. We're trying to look ahead to our schedule and figuring out whether we go through that stage and then bring it back again for what would be adoption review, or if there's a way for us to compress that so that there's just one more review with the council rather than two more.
So once the adoption's done, does ODOT program the money for it? Or so when we get from this point to an actual design on a phase, we're gonna go through a whole other public input process in regards to that phase.
To that specific phase, yes.
So really at the end of the day, all we're sort of acknowledging from ODOT is this is the stuff we want you to consider. This is how when we get to a phase, yes, we want to do it. Safety is important. Here's sort of our values, and here's some of the public input so you can actually design, get to an actual design.
Right, and that design process would be highly collaborative between the city and ODOT too.
Okay, perfect. And I know Bill with ODOT's out there. I'm just going to call this point out again. Safety questions would be a lot easier with more availability from a data perspective. The data on this, if you look at the slides, is from 2016. I know it's a huge gap long-term for ODOT. I know you guys are working on it. I just want to acknowledge that getting more timely data would help in conversations about transportation safety. All right, I'm looking around. Steve?
Yep. I support the raised median concept, but if I was a business out there, I would be scared to death. And I understand that. We have to realize they are the economic engine that supports Thurston. And I just hope we communicate with them enough that they become supporters of this. So that's very important. That's all.
Leonard?
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to second what Councilor Pishneri said about the trucks. I know a lot of truck drivers who drive down Main. They would much rather not get on Main at all. They're terrified that they're going to hit a pedestrian. And I know that it's the state's call to make on whether trucks are going to be allowed on Main, but I'm going to continue to advocate for taking trucks off of Main below Bob's drop. That's all I got. Thanks.
Joe?
So just for my own clarification, my brains, how far will one travel? I guess there's two different speed zones on Main Street I'm referring to. So let's use the middle zone, about 35 miles per hour. How far will the vehicle travel in half a minute? About? Anybody got a quick calculator? Brian's got one out.
Yeah, 30 miles an hour is 44 feet per second. So
Okay.
44 times 30, about 1,300 feet.
1,300 feet or so.
Quarter of a mile.
So 1,300 feet is basically, or could be, as far as how many blocks to average block is what, 300 feet?
It's so variable. I couldn't give you.
I guess it's true.
a good answer.
I guess in my brain, what I'm trying to figure out, you're talking about same thing with what Steve was saying, and my concerns is that you're talking about limiting the ability to turn left off of Main Street into businesses and into the side streets, et cetera. And I know you mentioned during the presentation that you would have those turns available at major intersections. And so I'm trying to figure in my head, if I live on Main Street, let's say in some random apartment, and I go to the store, how far past or how many blocks I have to travel beyond my residence and then attempt to turn around. And then if those left turns will be permitted, are you going to allow U-turns? And if you allow U-turns, are you anticipated the amount of space needed to safely make U-turns to be able to go back to where you wanted to go into? That's a concern I would have. And it's, and I think part of that, and like Mary Lee was talking about, part of getting the buy-in is trying to really, how much of an impact are we placing on just people being able to get around? And I agree, on foot and on bike, it's all beautiful, it's rosy, but on vehicles, you can't jump those raised medians. So how much backup traffic we're creating, going two directions in one section of Main Street, so you're increasing the flow, but also how much more are you going to increase the potential for accidents with vehicles trying to make U-turns in the middle of Main Street to get back to where they're trying to turn into? I mean, there's a balance there, and it seems like, I don't know, if it almost seems like we're potentially creating a bigger problem than what we have.
Well, balance is absolutely what we're striving for. And in the plan, we show a roundabout essentially where every traffic signal is today, excepting Bob Straub Parkway. We're also showing one at 48th Street, I believe. That's the one that runs up into the Warehouser and then runs also south. And so that would be an added one. So let's look at, the most likely, based on crash data, location that we would have a first project would probably be from 42nd to 54th. And so if we were to do 42nd, 54th, and 48th with roundabouts and have a median in between them, we certainly will have places where we could have left turns occurring into streets. And if there's a very high private property area that has a lot of turning movement in and out of it, which we can predict that pretty well, and we can also obviously count it for existing development. I can certainly see us providing left turns into those sites. One concept that we didn't discuss explicitly is that what we call three-quarter access, in other words, left turn in but no left turn out, is a really good way to get people into businesses, because getting into it is the higher interest of the business and property owner than getting out of it, because once they're there and buy, then they're going to go and then they're going to find their way home. And so that's just their perspective. So I think that we will, I'm certain that we will have breaks in the median that allow either residential streets or very high volume commercial properties, being able to get access into them. And so that, I think, addresses some of your statement about you're that apartment dweller who's going down to the store. How long is it going to take them? I think another thing I would say is that by both the roundabouts and the medians are going to help traffic flow to smooth. And so it may not be quite as fast, but it's going to be certainly more consistent, more steady, and have less interruptions. So less stop and go, less abrupt behavior. And so the travel is just going to be smoother. It'll be more predictable because there's going to be less of those kinds of interruptions. And Mr. Mayor, if I may, there was one thing that I did not address with Councilor Pitts, and he asked about audible crosswalks and audible signals. And I'm not sure if Councilor Pitts, you were referring to the existing traffic signals or new signals, so I'll just address both. The existing traffic signals are, of course, ODOT's responsibility, and as they choose to, they will make upgrades. So that could occur organically because they are just in a process of making upgrades to their traffic signals, or it could occur consistent with the other projects that either our safety project or other projects that occur in the corridor. And so that would cause them to put the audible pedestrian signals in at that point in time. Now, if we either with or without these Main Street safety oriented projects, if we choose to put a new crossing in, like a rapid flashing beacon, or in higher speed areas, a pedestrian hybrid beacon, those would be audible when we construct them. So I think we're going to cover that base pretty well. And one of the other comments that was made is about data, and that there's kind of a lack of data that seems to be current. Please be aware that the funding process through the All Roads Transportation Program will be using the most current data that's available to select those projects, and we compete on a region-wide basis for that money. So we will have, if we get funded, then we'll have that data, and we can use that in part of our public outreach efforts.
Perfect. All right. All right, before we wrap up here, I just want to point out one other sort of observation about safety. We just talked about how much you travel when 1 second for when you're going 30 miles an hour is 44 feet. And in a world where there's distracted driving, I just would encourage people to just keep that in mind. The minute you look down at your phone, you just crossed 44 feet without without seeing anything that was happening. And even though we're talking about safety, I think it's also critical to remember that we can all look for, put more space between vehicles and improve our own safe driving habits. Before we adjourn, I think we're off to CETA executive session at 7 o'clock. So that is not going to be on this link. It's going to be Leonard.
Welcome back, Marilee.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So it will be on the executive session link that should be in your email, and we are going to assemble at 7 o'clock. All right. Perfect. I'm going to adjourn this, and we'll talk to you guys at 7 o'clock. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.